Welcome to the European podcast. While the European Union is on its way to achieving climate neutrality and the new European Commission is not going to give up on the climate ambitions reflected in the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package, climate seems not to be too much of a priority of the Polish EU Council presidency. Today we'll discuss the EU climate policy with Thomas Lewis of the Climate Action Network Europe. Hello, Thomas.
Hi.
You have recently published Council Europe's own proposal for the electrification plan for Europe. In the light of the latest EU policy developments and the achievements made under the previous European Commission, do you consider these efforts by the Commission insufficient? Should the ambitions be higher?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be no surprise that we're going to say, as a climate NGO, that we believe the ambitions need to go a lot further than they've gone so far. I also think it's worth reflecting the sort of shift in narrative around the new Commission, sort of, I wouldn't say away from the Green Deal. We need to keep the Green Deal as the focus, but having more of this look around industry, competitiveness, security. Polish presidency is also talking about a lot about security. So for us, I think what we're trying to focus on is how can we ensure that while we're looking at these topics, that the climate, the decarbonizing of energy isn't left behind. And I think a big key aspect of this would be around this announced electrification action plan, the future grid package, and what happens with the clean industrial deal.
And in its publication, Can Europe highlights that meeting future electricity demands while phasing out fossil fuels, coal by 2030 and fossil gas by 2035 in the power sector, will require the EU to triple its renewables by 2030. Do you think it's still feasible? We have 5 years left until this target.
I think these things are doable. Also, so the way in which we frame our modeling is that we see a significant uptick in renewable installation, but also by 2040 we also see the halving of energy demand, which helps us get there a bit. So while we're ramping up the renewables, we don't have to ramp up so many because we've reduced how much energy we have to fill at the end, and then of course we push out the remaining fossil fuels. I think in order to sort of speed up the renewables rollout, I think a lot of concerning talk seem to be about environmental boundaries to this, sort of saying that, well, the environmental impact assessments are the problem or permitting is the problem. And how we see it is really, we're going to have to speed up this rollout by bringing barriers down, but this is going to have to be through, helping permitting through digitalization or supporting staff to get this off the ground. It's not about pushing against environmental legislation. It's really about making sure that we can get solar on rooftops where possible. It's about making sure that energy communities can really own these resources and put investment into them. So it's perfectly doable. And I think actually Poland's quite an interesting country to look at this, actually, because, Poland several years ago, the vast majority of its energy or its electricity sector was 95% was coal-based. You look now and it's significantly reduced to about, I think it was 34% of its power is now coal-based. This has really been driven by the uptick of solar energy. And I think solar really, Poland is one of the biggest markets in the EU for solar, a lot of this being rooftop. So you can see these very, very quick rollouts that are happening, and you see the uptick in the rollouts of renewable technologies is really exponential. What's the question now is what barriers are being hit at the moment, and the barriers that are being hit is there's some investment, there's grids, and we really go into our electrification report.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Poland, and indeed Poland is one of the countries that face the greatest challenges in terms of decarbonization and the green transition overall. How would you assess its planned way of green transition, its green transition plan, particularly regarding electrification? Is it weak in terms of climate ambitions?
Yeah, so how I put this there, around Poland, there's several factors. As I said, the rapid uptick of solar is a very, very positive story. And there's a bit of fear that this isn't being harnessed enough. You have this rapid uptick. You should keep rolling with this. But there's several things that we need to factor in. So, firstly, Poland managed to get in negotiations on the electricity market design, this derogation for coal in its capacity mechanisms. So it has this massive amount of state funding still going to coal way past the previous deadline. So this amount of money going towards coal, which could be shifted towards renewables, energy efficiency is deeply concerning. The other aspect, and we go through this in our electrification paper, is the idea of gas-led electrification. This sort of our warning here is that when you need high levels of electricity, which is a very, very good way to, make people not use gas for their heating. You should use electricity. So it's renewable electricity, or for industry, you should be using electricity. Some people will do is actually just burn gas in a large turbine, create that electricity, and then you're still linked to fossil fuels at the end of the day. It might be a little bit more efficient. You might get some savings with it. It might use a little bit gas overall, but really you're still linked to fossil fuels. And in a report we show looking at the amount of gas plants that Poland wants to build, it aims, compared to what it has now, it aims to increase the capacity to over triple. And the idea behind this is that the claims are, well, we need a flexible energy system. You can turn a turbine on, you can turn it off, but the amount being built, a lot of these will be running many, many hours in the day, where really what should be invested in this moment is using battery energy storage coupled with the new solar, coupled with the new wind, in order to not have to use this gas turbine. So I say there's great strategy being made, but the plans that are upcoming, deeply concerning. This will completely lock you into further fossil fuels. And in fact, actually very clearly not bring down prices. Gas is expensive. The idea that you make your electricity out of the expensive thing is very ludicrous. And if you keep electricity prices expensive, not good for industry, not good for households, and not good for electrification. People aren't going to say, well, what's the point of me jumping from gas to electricity if electricity is still expensive because all the gas with making the electricity? It's a bit absurd. So really the plan needs to be, looking at renewables.
Yeah, it would be definitely good if our policymakers heard your recommendations. And the European Commission has recently published its competitiveness compass, which aims to secure a competitive economy through decarbonization and the development of green technologies. Still, the document has been criticized for its lack of specific measures. What is your opinion on this?
I think if we compare to the original leaks we'd seen and what we've got in the end, you can argue there's a little bit of an improvement, ever so minor. There's a mention to the climate target of 90%. There's a bit more a narrative around, having to get rid of gas in the system, using flexibility. Yeah, but I'm really trying to grab for positives here. I think generally it is a bit of the agenda that's being set is one of simplification, which is a bit of a word for deregulation a little bit. So for us, it's the ambition really isn't there. I think climate has been taken at the heart somewhat, and I think that is concerning for us. I mean, at least in the compass, you've got a bit of an outline of what the Commission wants to be doing. You have this industrial decarbonisation package, electrification action plan, which would be next year, this grids package as well. And I think those are the interesting areas where something could be done there, but it needs to be ambitious. So I think for an electrification action plan, for us, it's very important. It's not just for industry. The narrative around it's been about industrial decarbonisation, but there are plenty of households who will benefit massively from heat pump rollouts in order to reduce their bills, in order to decarbonise their energy usage. And for us, I think it's quite important because when you're looking at decarbonising industry with electricity, you're going to be relying on, in many cases, state aid and public subsidies. And I think it's very difficult for a household, especially the most vulnerable who can't heat their homes very well, have high energy prices, to be looking at the governments giving lots of money to industry and saying, well, what are we getting in return? And I think there's one thing just about social justice and fairness there, but also I think there's something worth saying to political parties worry about voters. Like, you don't want a backlash to this thing. You need this to rise all boats. So I think that's a big aspect that's quite important there.
Mm-hmm. And we also have the new emission trading system upcoming, embracing both buildings and transport, and it is very controversial. And some countries, including Poland, are pursuing very strongly for postponing its coming into life. And do you think it justified, or it should be implemented without postponing any legislation?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to comment specifically on ETS because it's less of my area. But from what I understand from my colleagues, is what's quite important is to make sure those social protections are there with current ETS and whatever if it happens in the future. So make sure that those who would be, potentially more harmed or find it more difficult under these measures, to make sure that those issues are sort of solved financially effectively. So this might be through measures linked directly to ETS or around ETS. But sorry, my answer is going to be quite limited here.
And when it comes to the legislation, the Commission is set to publish the Clean Industrial Deal in late February. And what are your expectations for this strategy? What would you like it to deliver?
Yeah, so I think our understanding is one big pillar of the deal will be looking at affordable energy, and I think that is sort of the buzzword at the moment in many aspects. Since the energy crisis, prices are still higher than they were. When we talk of competitiveness, there's a lot of conversation around America having significantly lower prices for energy and that boosting their competitiveness. Of course, they've also had a bit more of infrastructure planning as well around that with the IRA that sort of helped it a bit more as well. So I think that's going to be a key part of it. And I think for us, it's important to one, when we talk about lowering electricity prices, for us, it can't just be simply a subsidy to industry with no strings attached, with just free. It has to be when industry is receiving aid and support, it has to make sure that it's still complying with the polluter pays principle to make sure that any historic emissions that have been released, they're not getting out of these. It's also impossible that any money being given to industry is also leading to a transformation plan to make sure they are decarbonizing their efforts, so that it can lead in certain cases to renewables being installed on site, battery storage to increase flexibility, things of this nature. And I think also what's quite important is, it's not just a conversation of lowering electricity prices, but there's a bit of rumors of lowering gas prices. And this is where it gets a bit, concerning for us, because at the moment, obviously, energy prices very, very high. The higher gas prices has been incentivizing people to look at electricity. And so any sort of legislation that aims too much at sort of lowering gas and not focusing on the alternatives sort of could have the wrong effect of sort of locking organizations and companies longer into gas usage. So anything around there, really, it should be focusing on, let's roll out renewables, let's roll out grids, let's roll out battery storage, bring the electricity price down and get people shifting over. And I think that's what we'd like to see in a clean industrial deal. I fear that we won't be seeing so much of that, but let's, I think we will be seeing a lot of the ideas of electrification. I just think there might be a bit too much emphasis on just allowing gas to continue. I think that's the fear.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the regulation, and the regulation was the word used by Donald Tusk in his latest speech in the European Parliament, in which he outlines the priorities of the Polish EU presidency. And he opted for the regulation of legislation, including the legislation regarding the Green Deal. And this approach has faced strong criticism from some political groups, particularly the Greens. And do you believe that the regulation is the right way, or it's like it will bring benefit to no one?
To just have more regulation around environmental things at the EU level. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think this is what Tusk meant, actually, in his speech.
There are legitimate things to be said, that there is a significant amount of legislation that's come forward and it needs to be implemented. And we're definitely on the side of, let's make sure you can get the renewable energy directives, the energy efficiency directive, buildings directive, market design. There's plenty of stuff that member states need to be doing now and that can be implemented, that can bring short-term and these medium-term benefits. So I think having an emphasis on that is very, very, very important. So when people say there's a lot of stuff to implement, they're not wrong. I just think there should be this focus on it, and actually an EU focus on it. The Commission should also be making sure that these things are implemented in a timely manner. Many of countries are over the deadlines for certain files. But there are still things that can be done at a European level that's very important. And I think some of the people saying things about, we don't need more legislation with the EU, they're starting to say, actually, let's stop the legislation in the EU ones we've already agreed to. So this is a bit of the concern. But I think when it comes to Polish presidency, I mean, that there are so many things where, the word security is used so much. Maybe it's, cyber security, or there's conversations on immigration that can be quite problematic in many aspects. But I think when it comes to the energy part, I think the security has been really focused on, where are we getting our gas? Some countries saying we should go back to Russian. I don't think Poland's saying that at all, but there's a conversation of looking at American gas. And I think what's missing from the conversation is really saying, look, homegrown renewables are very secure. When it is within the EU territory, you can guarantee this is where you can get energy. So I think that's the focus. I think it's having very, very strong grid networks so we can trade electricity between member states. I think that is a very secure manner. Of course, we've had issues with interconnection cables potentially being sabotaged by Russian fleets. So that there's a question of cybersecurity and physical security around cables. That's an interesting element I think the Polish president wants to look into. But, when we're talking about moments where we fear we could have blackouts, well, really what we need is, large energy storage can just give in stored renewable electricity at that moment. So I think it's a bit of a new framing of it, but we've got to see security in a completely different measure. And I think these sort of things I'm talking about, they're going to come from EU discussions, EU legislation, other action plans. And I think as much as you want to say we just go back to the member states and work with what we have, we are sort of a bit stronger together in sharing everything and being secure. That's what I would say to Mr. Tusk.
I hope that he will hear you. And you mentioned renewables, but what else is missing in the Polish presidency program regarding the climate policy? How do you think? What is your opinion?
Yeah, I think having a greater look at demand reduction, I think that's a very, very key aspect. This is also something from the EU level. I mean, but I can bring back to Poland in a second. But when we had the hearings for Dan Jorgensen, we managed the EU Energy Commissioner. We heard that there would be a renewable target of some form to 2040, which we're very happy to see. Let's see what that looks like. But his opinion was we didn't need something for energy efficiency, which was very surprising, a bit shocking. And I think the argument here is, well, we need to grow. This will be a bit of a cap on growth. But for us, I mean, we're having massive issues with high energy prices. I think reducing the energy needs brings the price down. You have the same amount of energy, but less need for it. The price goes down. It's a simple balancing of market. So I think in the Polish context, this is also very true. I think the renovation rate needs to improve of households to bring up the energy efficiency to reduce the amount of gas being used in heating, which also then reduces the amount of electricity you need when you want to switch it over from gas heating to electricity heating. I think this is a big focus as well. And also, I would also jump in a little bit and say, talk about renewables. I mean, Poland has some nuclear plans as well. I call them plans because they really aren't something that's, I think it'd be very hard to get anything like this off the ground for any new nuclear. We've seen how long it took Finland to bring their reactor that only just came online the other year. It's exorbitantly high prices. Flamanville in France has had extreme delays. It's only just started producing some power now, and apparently recent reports say it won't be able to produce at full power, so that's a bit of a disaster. In the UK, Hinkley Point C, it's still not off the ground. So the idea of new nuclear and betting on that is a big risk for Poland, and I think that's a big thing that we should be looking at, is saying the idea that you're going to build this in a timely manner is a bit absurd. Focusing on renewables now is faster, cheaper, and more likely to succeed, and far better for security, competition, things of this nature.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And let's hope that the green ambitions of the new European Commission do not remain on paper, and that the Polish EU presidency will be more determined than it is now in delivering on it. And our guest today was Thomas Lewis of the Climate Action Network Europe. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you so much for having me.